Hi there. So what you see in front of you there is a little sort of mind map spider diagram that I did the other day, uh, based on the thought, which was basically what would I say to an aggressive autocratic dictator such as Putin, um, in terms of how I think they're getting it wrong for their own people at a psychological level. Now, obviously, there's plenty of arguments to be made about how being a harmful presence on the international stage is shooting yourself in the foot from an economical point of view. But I just wanted to focus here on the psychological aspect. And I think it all kind of started for me with this thought that popped into my head, which was basically, is there a Russian translation of the book I'm Okay, You're Okay by Thomas Harris? And if there is, can somebody give Putin a copy? And then the rest of this kind of grew out of that. But in practice, what happened when I made this diagram is it's basically really just a high level but integrated summary of a few ideas from psychotherapy and pop psychology from the last century or so. So it can function as that. So diving straight in there, I'm okay, you're okay. Like some of the other things on here, it's not something I've read for many years, but I think that's the fact that I haven't felt the need to reread it. It's just a testimony to the way it really captured the essence of something, which kind of I feel sank in at a deep level, a kind of foundational level for my outlook, really, so that I didn't really feel that I necessarily needed to reread it again more recently, and that goes for some of the other things on here as well. But it also means, because I haven't read them recently, it's very easy for me to give a high-level summary because that's all I can actually remember anyway. Right, so I'm okay, you're okay. So applying that to Putin, well, if you look at a lot of sort of dictator figures, there's a kind of, well, if you look at Hitler as well as Putin, this kind of sense in which they were into sport and the national team and obsessed with, good performance in football and the Olympics and things like that. What you've got there is a kind of a game that's been taken too literally, that's become too real. And it sort of taps into tribalism and various other things I'm going to talk about in a moment. But if at the end of the game and the whistle blows, and you remember it's a game, and your sense of your own worth and the opponent's worth are restored to natural levels and equality, and it's all water under the bridge, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if you are deeply tied up in the result of that kind of thing, in order to try and build your own self-worth, then well, it's not reality. It's a game that's been taken too seriously, and you slipped out of I'm okay, you're okay. So in other words, you're off track for being happy. And for me, I'm okay, you're okay, and the games people play by Eric Berne, they're so tightly bound together in my mind that I almost kind of think of them as the same thing in a way. But so games people play is basically looking at human psychology in terms of the way that we often get stuck into psychologically destructive patterns or games. A lot of them based around the idea of either, I'm worthy, important, good, but someone else or some other group are a problem. Or alternatively, some other person or people are wonderful, but I'm rubbish. And so that would obviously be more of a victimhood type game. And from the kind of I'm great, but someone else is the problem type of point of view, you've got games such as the one that Harris calls, I think it's I'm going to get you, you son of a bitch. I'm not saying that there aren't people who genuinely do behave like sons of bitches from time to time and do need to be sorted out, but that's a sort of practical issue which you can approach without getting into game playing in order to do it. So that was the kind of starting point for this, but then I was kind of aware of how this really does feed into another model for happiness, which is the Perma model, because it feeds into the relationships aspect of that, as do some other things. So yeah, the Perma model, this was put together by Ronald Siegel, starting with the question not what are the causes of depression, anxiety, neurosis, and how can they be healed, but rather what are the causes of happiness and how can we do more of them? And each of these can be broken down into lots of subheadings, some of which are common to more than one of the categories. But at a very high level, he was talking about P for positive emotion, E for engagement, R for relationships, M for meaning, and A for accomplishment. And I think I'm okay, you're okay in this context. It applies to relationships, but also via this kind of stuff to meaning as well. So yeah, on the international stage, when we talk about relationships, obviously in that context, it's relationships between one country and another. But I think the same things apply. So it's one of the things in the Perma model, because that model, by the way, I should point out, that's put together from research. It's not theoretical ideas plucked out of the air. It's the result of research into things that have been shown to make people happy. And relationships is in there because you need to have positive, supportive, healthy relationships with those around you if you're going to be happy. So if an entire nation is basically on bad terms with pretty much the whole world, what does that say about the psychological prospects of that nation? I don't think it's a wise choice. Now, I think meaning taps into that as well, because, or rather it's closely connected, and it's an important consideration, because you could be charismatic, funny, engaging, and you could attract people to you, but you might know inside yourself that you are a bad person. And so you're not going to get a tick for meaning, because meaning is about things that you know deep inside are good about what you're doing. So it's a true sense of purpose within yourself. So it's not enough to be able to convince as a leader. It's not about just being able to convince an entire nation that a certain project is a noble one. It's about knowing inside yourself. So you can't just pump out fake news and hope that that becomes genuinely meaningful if you know that it's a lie. So I think that's extremely important in that context as well. So when I put this together, then I put in these things here because I think they are important for meaning. Noetics, that's where you'd be looking to read things by people like Dean Radin and Rupert Sheldrake and people like that. And it's basically realizing that there's a lot of research out there, a lot of experimental results and statistics that actually lean quite heavily towards the idea that certain types of ESP are real. So, extraordinary as that might sound. And I think it's just a matter of opening up to those possibilities, because if you were to decide, and it is a decision, to embrace a purely materialistic, mechanistic view of everything, then at some level, ultimately, you're going to come up against a sense of pointlessness, and that is not meaning. It's the opposite. So if you want to be happy, I would open up to these kind of things to some extent, realizing that in doing so, you're not actually going against science. Science is a method with a huge number of extremely important practical purposes, and some of the results that come out of some of the research that are done do actually leave the door open for certain types of ESP, but also philosophically, and I mean that in a logical sense, not just as a sort of creative endeavor, but philosophically, there is no mechanistic, materialistic explanation for the presence of the phenomenon of being able to experience existence. Conscious awareness in that sense, not a kind of ability to output conscious awareness as an output, but the actual internal ability to experience existence, that kind of awareness. There is nothing close to any kind of mechanistic explanation for that, and really, let's be honest, nor could there ever be. It's a kind of logical impossibility. So there's absolutely nothing fringe, I don't think, about at least being open to this kind of stuff. But beyond kind of research, beyond philosophy, it's also important, of course, to actually reach inside yourself and sort of endeavor to make contact with that part of yourself, that spiritual part of yourself and of the cosmos, through things like meditation. Once you're doing that kind of stuff, then you can really start to tick meaning. But I think it has to be accepted that by doing that, you're not going to be able to devalue another nation, another people, and still feel that you've got that ticked. That is never going to be in line with genuine spirituality. And of course, I'm directing that once again to the Russian situation at the time of speaking. Now, so I've got accomplishment here. Another of the aspects of PERMA. I've got that again linked to I'm okay, you're okay, because while it's on this list because a sense of accomplishment is one of the things that has been shown to make people happy. I think it's important to remember I'm okay, you're okay in that context, because if you define accomplishment simply in terms of beating other people, then you're slipping out of I'm okay, you're okay, and it's a purely relative type of accomplishment as well. I mean, how do you know the other person isn't so rubbish at it that it makes your achievement meaningless? Better, I would say, to define accomplishment in terms of your own improvement in certain areas, and also just creating or doing or making something good, whether it's something that's beautiful, entertaining, uplifting, inspiring, whatever it is, just some sort of good work. But it can be totally something humble. It doesn't have to be some grand mission. Research has shown, and personal experience will also bear me out here. All sorts of quite humble things can give you a very pleasing sense of accomplishment. It could be growing something in the garden or just making something with your hands. So I've got this linked here to hobbies and interests and crafts and things like that, which I've also got linked to another one here, engagement. So that's an example of how some of these things are quite closely interwoven. So in the Russian context, what I'm saying is that winning a war is not what we're talking about for accomplishment, not at all. In fact, that could have very much the other type of result at a deeper psychological level. I think that's where Russia is getting it slightly wrong with all these kind of triumphalist victory day sort of projects. Now, so we've been focusing on this side of things, but moving towards the center here, another aspect of relationships, I think it's worth considering these two. So, evolutionary psychology. Now, I've got that in there because I'm thinking of tribalism. Now, part of human psychology is obviously not so much this stuff, but it's hardwired into us as a result of the evolutionary process, which itself, I don't think it's necessary to adopt some sort of religious point of view where you view this as necessarily being aligned with this. It has its own rules, and so what I'm trying to say is that there are aspects of human hardwiring that are kind of working against what it is that humans are now trying to do. There are programs in that hardwiring that we can see are in common with other primate groups. So you can see the sort of extreme violence that can erupt in primate groups when one troop is up against another troop, and its instincts. It's not something that those primates have decided on consciously. It's an instinct that comes to the fore. It's a very aggressive instinct, but it does seem to be present in humans too. And so what we need in that context, and by the way, I think there's other things in human psychology which work very much in our favor in terms of happiness, but for that particular one, that's something which we need to distance ourselves from. So, the only instance of tribalism I can think of that's positive is where we think about things like how all humans ultimately descend from the same group of early modern humans, and in that sense we're all one tribe. So a tribal identification with that obviously I think has many positive aspects because of how it can draw all these different nations together in the realization that we're all one family. But other than that, whenever it's divisive, I think tribalism is something to distance ourselves from. So that's why I've got that in there. And Jungian psychology is kind of a related thing, but it's a kind of a different way of looking at the same thing. It's this idea of archetypes, and in this context, we're talking about one of them in particular, which is what Jung called the shadow, and that is that place in our psyche where humans sort of relegate all those things they'd rather not acknowledge as being a part of themselves. And there's a phenomenon that Jung talks about called projection, where you can then find yourself projecting all of that stuff onto someone else or onto another group of people, and that's where demonization comes from. And I think it's the dangerous mix of projecting the shadow and the hard wiring to do with tribalism. That's the reason why you often find countries hating their neighbors. They might not care so much about other countries, but it's often their neighbors because it kind of taps into the evolutionary psychology of a rival troop, a rival tribe competing for the same resources. You get all these horrible instincts coming to the fore, horrible in the human context anyway. And when you start throwing a bit of demonization in there as well, that's when brutality and evil can unfortunately come to the fore. So awareness and understanding and the ability to step aside from that kind of thing is important there, as much as it's important to also focus on the good stuff. So positive emotion is in this list. It basically means spend time cultivating, nurturing, focusing on positive stuff, positive emotions, and that's what you've got things like keeping a gratitude journal. So that kind of stands at the other end of the spectrum from understanding the darkness within yourself and learning how to prevent it from being destructive. And then, from that stands at the other end of the spectrum from focusing on all the lovely stuff, keeping a journal about all the stuff that makes you happy. But that is important too. Why? Well, not from a theoretical point of view, but from a research point of view, it's been shown to work. I stuck in a few other things there when I was making this diagram that are things that I think tip the balance towards positivity as well. So I've kind of covered most of these now. I haven't yet mentioned engagement, but this is a very important one, and it's about flow states, it's about motivation, it's about doing things that you find interesting, and humans are naturally high dopamine creatures. I think it's all very well to say, yes, we need to go on a dopamine fast from now and again, stop doing things that increase dopamine so that we can kind of reset the balance. Fine, but ultimately what we're looking for is quite a continuous flow of dopamine in order to be happy. That's why it's in the list here. But it's about finding ways to do that give you sovereignty and autonomy, and it's not just about scrolling through social media or the internet in order to get that sense of engagement. It's about finding ways to do it that are healthy for you. And so it could be just taking up a hobby that when you do that hobby, you're engaged in the moment. It could be something artistic, it could be making something with your hands, but when you do it, that's what you're focused on, and it helps you be in the moment. And also things that you find interesting, just following up on those, it's going to create a sense of motivation. How does that fit into the Russian question? Well, forcing young men to go off and do something they don't want to do, low motivation, low morale, that is not a wise decision for the psychological health of your people either. So once again, coming back to this, some pop psychology for happiness that aggressive autocrats and those affected by them ought to know was my original idea. I think that fits into that as well. But as I say, this I think functions as a little reminder and summary, even outside of that context. Obviously it does. I dare say there's other things I could have included here if I knew more about psychology. I'm not an expert, but I'm doing this. In all transparency, I'm doing this because it's one of these things that makes me feel engaged and a little bit of meaning, accomplishment, and so on. Making a little video from time to time, it's just one of the things I like to do. Hopefully it has some purpose if it's helpful to anyone out there. But anyway, I'm just going to call it a day there and put this one out there. Thank you.